myself. Today, we have a special co-host with us. My brother is here, but he's in the background like the wizard taking notes. So we have Melanie Nazarian, Brian's wonderful life and better half. And Melanie is an advocate. And Melanie, can you give us a little bit of, listeners, a little bit of background of what you do and whatnot?
Sure. So as you said, I'm an advocate, but I specialize in special education. So I assist parents and their children with accessing their educational rights from as early as transitioning from early intervention around 2.5 years old, all the way up through, in Massachusetts, the age of 22, when they transition out of special education into adult services. And I also support students in Southern New Hampshire up through the age of 21 as well.
And how long have you been doing that for?
It's been about 10 years.
Really? And I hear through the grapevine you're very busy.
Very busy. All of us are very busy this year. COVID has really thrown a tough one for all of us.
Yes, it has. Your husband was raving about you about a month ago. He sent me a link to a case that you were involved in. I didn't know what he was sending to me for because he just didn't tell me the background behind it. I thought he wanted me to review it. And I looked down and I saw your name involved in the case and being a positive case for you, which must have made you happy and showing that your work is being appreciated and it's helping individuals get what they need for care.
Yes. Yeah. It's tough when it ends up going to hearing like that particular case did. You know, the goal of any special education advocate is to help resolve disputes at the team level, because it avoids not just the financial burden of moving forward with an attorney in a hearing, but also the emotional burden of it all.
Excellent. And we have you on tonight because we have a special guest tonight. And it's a big topic that admittedly, I don't know. I mean, I know friends or, and Erik Voigt, who's on and is our guest, he's involved with a Facebook page called, was it Dual Spectrum Dad? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. And it deals with autism and having children with autism. So this is going to be a great episode for people to learn and for you to share autism and how it affects individuals. And basically you can teach me and send me some other listeners what we probably don't know. Erik, tell us, and I'll start it off. And I know Brian and Melanie, they have a lot of questions for you. And I'm just going to say, so start us off and tell us what exactly Dual Spectrum Dad is, how you got it started, and what it's geared towards.
Yeah. So, I soon after I found out that, so I have two children, both autistic, son 16 and a daughter 15. So the name Dual Spectrum Dad is, I use dual spectrum because my daughter is highly autistic and nonverbal and on the lower end of the spectrum, and my son is on the higher end of the spectrum, closer, and I hate using the term, but closer to normal. They both have different attributes to them. So, it kind of just gives me a perspective on the different traits that autism has and how it kind of affects children. So, as most parents, when I first found out, I didn't know what autism was. I had to look it up, had no clue, we, look it up and then you look up things on the internet and, you get all scared, right? My wife did it first. And then, I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And, so once I started getting more knowledge into it, I'm like, and I started going along and learning things. I kind of soon realized that there's, at that time, 12, 13 years ago, there wasn't a lot of information out there as to what help you can actually get and what therapies were there. And, it was really difficult to get information and everything. So once I started learning things, I just thought to myself, well, hey, maybe I can share some things that I, learned. I started writing blog posts and things like that of different experiences that I had. And I said, well, this is a good way to share them. So, just to give people some perspective on what autism is and how it affects different aspects of your life.
So when you're starting off, you're trying to learn for yourself, and then, trying to raise children based on what you've learned and do it. How tough is that?
It's rough. It's really rough because one of the things you kind of get to is, okay, things are going to be difficult, right? I don't think you quite understand at first how difficult it can be. Everything is not as simple as it is for, your neighbor or your sister or whoever else's children. It's going to be a little difficult, but you don't actually quite comprehend exactly where that is. And then, it kind of gets to the point where it's not just their lives that have changed, yours have. As a parent, your life has now changed, and the direction that you thought you were going in has now took a right-hand turn. And you have to adapt to it.
Erik, when did you receive the diagnoses for your children? At what age and from whom? Who gave it to you? The pediatrician, a neurologist?
Yeah. So what happened is my son and daughter, we strangely enough, and my daughter is far worse, we didn't notice her as much as we noticed our son. He was, 2.5 or so and not talking. He had started saying, words, mommy and daddy and things like that. And then it just stopped. And then there was nothing. So we called early intervention. It was one of the things where we asked the pediatrician, and they really were like, oh, he's young. He's probably just not want to talk. He might have a little anxiety or something. And, so we called early intervention in. So they came out to the house, and there was 2 of them there, and they, do a bunch of different testing, and they come up to us, and as one of them is working with my son, the other one is watching my daughter in the playroom. So they then finish what they're doing. They sit my wife and I down, and they're like, listen, this is going to be a little rough, but we suspect he has autism. And again, I don't know what this is. And they said, it's a developmental problem, and this is something that's going to affect him his whole life. We don't know the severity, but you're going to need to, we cannot diagnose this. You're going to need a doctor to do that. So then right before they were leaving, they're saying, but we really want to come back and evaluate your daughter. And at this point, knowing the signs that I know now as an experienced parent, I should have seen she was, the same, right? But we missed it because we were just we're thinking, oh, she's just really young and it's nothing. And when they came back for that appointment, there were 6 therapists there. And that one was rough, because at that point, now we kind of had researched autism and looked into it, and then find out, 6 therapists come over and they tell us, look, she's going to be nonverbal. She's never going to speak. She has self-injurious behavior. She has the whole gambit of what a severely autistic child has. And again, they said we can't diagnose it, but so soon after that, we made appointments with their pediatricians and their doctors. And then once we kind of mentioned autism, they then actually diagnosed it.
So Erik, what I find to be really tricky is that while a pediatrician could, I guess, technically diagnose it, in order to access services through ABA agencies or to get recognition through schools, often parents need to have a diagnosis from a highly specialized doctor, like a developmental pediatrician, a neurologist, a psychologist, a neuropsychologist. And sadly, most of those doctors that are affiliated with the big hospitals have wait lists of 6 months to an excess of 1 year. And so parents get that first visit from early intervention, have their hearts crushed by this possibility, right? Because they don't have an actual diagnosis yet, can't receive intensive services yet without it, and then have to wait an average of a year before they can get it confirmed and be able to feel like they're really diving in and getting their child as much as they possibly can. So in a way, it's fortunate that your pediatrician was able to give that diagnosis for you. And once you had that, what then did you put into place? What were you able to do in addition to early intervention?
So as soon as, you know, he's a really good pediatrician. My kids have only had two. He was the first one, and he's not a developmental specialist or anything, but you know, we live in a small town, so he's kind of he was a jack of all trades doctor, and their current pediatrician is too. Very, you know, skilled and very knowledgeable of everything. Fortunately, he really good guy. So what he suggested was to, you know, speak to neurology at Children's. You know, we could have went to UMass because we're closer, but you know, he suggested Children's, so we made the appointment. It did take about 6 months to get the appointment at Children's, and then we started from there and got a neurologist. At that point, we were not really getting any services, so to speak. It was more of, okay, this is what's going on. You know, they did, you know, they wanted to do all their kind of evaluations. They did everything, you know, they did hearing tests, vision tests, you know, everything. And, you know, at that point, my wife and I were just really, really confused still and not understanding, like, and they were young, again, like 3 and 2. So not, there wasn't a lot that we needed specifically at that point. But things kind of changed because at that point we decided that we wanted to move because my wife's parents lived in Florida and that they were retired and we could get help with the kids. And we made that move, and that was the worst mistake we ever made in our lives. Leaving Massachusetts to go to Florida was horrible. I would not do it. You know, it would take an hour for me to get into the whole torrid story about that. But just you know, Massachusetts is one of the top states in the country for autism, hands down, for services and all of that. So come to find out, you know, when we're there, we couldn't get much. The schools didn't provide a whole lot. They did what they called ABA, but it wasn't really ABA. It was just, you know, there were incidences where, you know, they at that time grouped all kids with disabilities together into a classroom, and it wasn't an autism specific class. So there were kids with all kinds of other issues in there, and it just, like, they got nothing out of it. They had a really good preschool teacher. She's awesome. She's from New York. But once they got past that, it was a mess. And we ended up coming back here, and that's when more of our actual services started.
So if we could maybe just give a little background for the listeners. ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis, but it is the most widely used evidence-based treatment for individuals with autism. And it applies for individuals from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other. What changes is the goals that they work on. And the person that develops the treatment plan using the ABA is called a board certified behavior analyst. And often, as with almost everything else in the medical field and in school, we use an acronym, and that acronym is BCBA. And the board of the accredited BCBAs has a website and a guide online that parents can go to that describes what ABA is, how it works, what the requirements are for supervision and parent training so that parents can be involved in working towards goals and making sure that the skills carry over across settings.
Erik, I can, from my perspective, and Melanie, we had Kylie and Gavin in ABA from almost day one, right? And I can tell you, and maybe you can share a little bit, Erik, from your perspective, but I feel like ABA was, in a lot of ways, a game changer for so many things that we were able to do with the kids as they got a little older.
Yeah, and you know, so two different approaches with both kids. My daughter ended up getting, you know, not only what she was getting at school, but then she was getting 3 hours at home after school. My son kind of got just what was in school. Um, but you know, yeah, I mean, it works. My daughter was a challenge, but because of her level that she's at, it's a challenge anyway. You know, but it does work. You know, I'm not one of the, I know there are parents out there, and then even autistic people that, you know, transition from children to adults that think it's torture. I don't believe that. In my opinion, you know, most of the autistic people that are saying it was torture don't even, the reason that they can even express the fact that they can do that and comprehend it is because they got it. I just, you know, but that's just my opinion. People have different opinions on that, but I think it helped the kids tremendously. You know, it's a positive reinforcement, not a negative reinforcement. A lot of times works better in the ABA, and you know, I think ABA 2 is therapist related. So some people get a bad experience. Don't throw out ABA, throw out the therapist and get another therapist.
Right.
Because it could be totally different.
Right. And again, it comes down to the skill level of the BCBA that you have, and who they have, or what level of autism they have the most experience working with. You know, and I can say that the BCBA that Brian and I use is also a school psychologist, and she has a great level of expertise with kiddos that are level 1 in autism, and the skills that she works on, while it still follows principles of ABA, it's more natural in the moment teaching. And so I agree, Erik. I think a lot of individuals with autism or families that have had negative experiences, often it comes down to who developed their treatment plan and the experience level that BCBA had.
Yeah, it's definitely we've had both. You know, we've had some that are really good, and we've had some that weren't. And you know, early on, we had one that wasn't the best, and we didn't really realize it. But then, as we went along, we did. And then from then, you know, we could tell right away whether something was going to work or not. But sometimes I think too, it's a matter of, you know, how that therapist relates to the children themselves. I think it's like everything else. People's personalities don't, you know, don't jive sometimes. And I think like that's part of it too. But I mean, I think the theory of ABA and as a therapy does work.
And Melanie too, I have this question. I'm getting the impression that it's hard, or doctors aren't willing to give a diagnosis of autism. They just, for whatever reason, it seems like it's not being done in a quick manner. It seems like you got to go through hoops to get that diagnosis, and then it's maybe I'm wrong. It sounds like at the beginning what Erik was saying and what Melanie was saying, it's like it's not something that doctors are. It's almost like a fight where they're not giving it that diagnosis right away. It might correct or incorrect in that.
If I could add in first, maybe I think because it is a lifelong disability. I mean, you can gain skills, right? But it's a significant diagnosis to give. And because it requires such a high level of expertise, it's hard to get in to see the doctor. So it's not so much that it's difficult to get the diagnosis if it's warranted versus waiting to get in to see someone who can give you it, or give you the evaluation necessary to give the diagnosis. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but there were a lot of public announcements / advertisements. A lot of them were by an organization called Autism Speaks that was talking about the significant increase in the rates of autism. It's higher in boys than it is in girls. And I couldn't tell you what the current statistic is, but it jumped from, maybe 1 in 200 to 1 in 66, maybe Erik knows. But one thing I think we need to consider with looking at that jump is the number of people that were becoming more educated and seeking diagnosis, because prior to the newest diagnostic manual that is used to diagnose autism. It was quite vague and it was difficult to kind of follow into a category. And so there were some individuals that were being evaluated for an intellectual disability, as an example. But if their cognitive scores didn't meet those criteria, even though they struggled with many other areas or red flags within the autism spectrum, they were dismissed without any diagnosis at all. And then reevaluated a couple of years later with a new diagnostic manual. And then that's when they received the autism diagnosis. So there was a great influx of people being diagnosed that actually had the diagnosis from when they were born, but it was either misdiagnosed or not caught. Erik, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I will say that, when that's always the argument out there, is there more autism and something's causing it, and there's more, people being born with autism now than before. I really don't think so. I think it is the fact that they're being diagnosed. They weren't before. My brother is, autistic. He's 57 now. He didn't get diagnosed as autistic until his 40s. When he was a kid and my mother took him in, the doctors would say, and he went to all these specialists and stuff, and they were always saying, we know something's wrong with him, but we don't know what it is. Yeah. He's got a problem. We don't understand what it is. And then, so he finally got diagnosed in his 40s. And some people say, well, why even bother? Well, because he gets benefits now that he wouldn't get. He gets assistance with things that he would not have gotten. So, but then, as far as the rates go, it is far more common for boys than girls. And then it's far more common to have boys being on the severe side than girls as well.
Oh, really?
So, I know I kind of, we did all kinds of genetic testing at the beginning because, it was a thing then. I think it still is sometimes, but we didn't really get any answers. And in all honesty, it wouldn't have changed anything anyway. Whether I knew where it came from or didn't matter. My job now is to help them be the best they can be. I don't care how it started. I'm also not a, anti-vaxxer either. I don't think vaccines did it either. Like there's something in, knowing the fact that, I kind of point towards genetics. I mean, my brother has it. I definitely have some traits. I would, some people have traits, and, what they did tell us was, not that it's proven, is that for my daughter to be the way she is, it would probably run on both sides.
And one thing too, Derek, that's interesting is the higher functioning quotes. The kids are very smart. There's some of them are some of them are very sharp. Melanie, you can speak to some of them.
Well, Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, who else wants to sit there and do coding for hours on end, not having to interact with other people? Yeah. Right.
Well, me and Derek.
Yeah.
We don't want to.
And Erik, and listen, the higher end and lower end functioning, I've been called lower end functioning as an attorney. So I don't take offense to it. It's just like,
lower functioning.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like whatever. But seriously, go ahead. Yeah. I don't want to.
No, I mean, I just think if they get older, they get more cognizant of what the self-aware. That's the word I'm looking for.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, like, one of the things, like, a lot of the tech companies are interested in them, especially like a lot of things in product testing and stuff like that, or like even with electronics and testing bugs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Autistic people don't tend to get bored doing that, and we would. Like they'll just keep repeating that task over and over and over and over and not have a problem with it and love it. My son has borderline photographic memory. He does not need a GPS. He remembers where things are. You took the wrong turn or whatever. Whatever he's into, he uses his tablet that he likes, and he researches things he's interested in. So, like, if you asked him what motor configurations you could get on a 1968 Z28, he could tell you. But then you ask him to take a test on something, and it's different. It just, there's a little give and a little take, right?
Well, that's interesting. because I'm looking at it and I'm like, I was going to ask you, like, what social communication and social interaction characteristics are related to autism. Like, what would you see that you would say, oh, that each, and maybe your child, because you have a daughter and son, which ones are, what applies to them differently?
So totally opposite. She would rather not interact with anyone. Whereas
And
my
that's
son
actually, to be honest
wants
with you, that's smart. To be honest
yeah,
with you.
right. This is true.
She has no idea what she's missing, because it's a good idea.
Yeah. Where my son, he likes to be very friendly and all that, but that's not the case. It fluctuates.
Yeah.
Depending on the child. So, they're both different. We've had problems in the past where he's like, well, she doesn't want to play with me, or I'm like, leave her alone. She just, she's not going to do that, but then she tends to bond with certain people, and then she's all over you, if you're the one she's bonding with.
Yeah.
But she, she's, not, but so for him, he has social anxiety, but not, it's weird. It's not with people. Like, he'll just come right up to you and hug you. He doesn't
really?
have a problem with it at all. But he has no spatial awareness. He's aloof, and he'd walk right into the street. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah. So, they're both different in their different ways. My daughter has a lot more sensory issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like, only certain people can touch her head or touch her, really. And then other people you can't. She's gonna, pull away. She doesn't want it. So they're both opposite in so many different ways.
Often for those that are diagnosed later on in life who didn't have delayed speech to start, it was the quality of the way they interacted with people and the way that they used their speech that qualified them for the diagnosis. So as an example, we call it echolalia, where they repeat something that they've heard over and over again, or they repeat themselves, and they might say it under their breath, or if they heard a saying in a movie, like a script, they would repeat that over and over. When they're speaking with someone, they may not be able to maintain eye contact. It's really hard for them, and so they might be, initially looking at the eyes of the person they're talking with, but then it would be fleeting and looking off to something else. And the other part, sometimes because of the eye contact, or because of that reduced awareness of what's going on around them socially, they might miss some of the nonverbal cues. So, signs that someone's bored, they might be talking about something in a perseverative way over and over again, but not catch, the cue that the person that's listening is bored and doesn't want to hear anymore without having to say something. So, yawning or, putting their head like this, they wouldn't necessarily catch that and not change their behavior in response. So it's more, for some kids, it's the quality of their interactions that is the difficult part.
Now, are there groups, as a parent, when you find out, that your child may have autism, are there other groups, or and you created, Erik, you started the Dual Spectrum Dad, to educate and help parents, get through the process and navigate them so they can, know what steps to take and navigate the process without any problems?
Yeah, I mean, there are groups out there. There are now agencies like, coincidentally, right behind my business I work at is HMEA, and they have a whole autism program. They have, teachers there. They do events for the children. There are different agencies that do that in Mass. The Kennedy Donovan Center is awesome. They do summer programs where they do a bunch of events during the summer, and they get everyone together and do different things. They usually do it during school vacation weeks too, where you can interact with other children. So there are things out there for it, and then there are people that kind of get together. There's the advocacy groups like Autism Speaks and things like that. But one of the things that people that don't like Autism Speaks do say is, well, all their money goes into research. They don't actually do a lot to help people. So, they don't actually do a lot of programs with people, but, there's stuff out there, but it's hard to find. Like, the main thing that I think people need a lot of is actual services, and knowing, what a school is responsible for, as opposed to what a parent's responsible for, or what what services you can get outside of school, and things like that. As with everything else, it's expensive. So there's not a lot out there for, like, and what I found early on was of a resource center of any kind, that will tell you, okay, if you're having these issues, this is what you want to do, or you can go to these services, or this issue for this thing. Not there. In Mass, you can get yourself set up with DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, and they have programs, and they have their waiver program and things like that. But it's difficult. There's not a lot of, autism is very, well known at this point, but it's still not where it should be.
If I could reiterate, I think when I first start working with a client that has a child that's been diagnosed with autism, the first thing I do is make sure that they've enrolled with DDS. And so the Department of Developmental Disabilities has an application online. It's a very long, arduous process, but they become the state agency responsible for the totality of, their services and their development. And when the child moves into adulthood, if they need services, they're the primary source for those services, including day programs, housing, those pieces. And then as Erik was mentioning, funding is a big issue. And so the second thing that I tell my clients is get on the Mass Health site and apply for Mass Health. And it's even more difficult than the DDS application process. Because the families have to fill out a general application at first for their entire family. And when they get to their child section where they're filling in the information, there's a tiny little box they have to check that says they have a disability expected to last 12 months or longer. And if they don't check that box, their process ends and they're found either eligible because they're lower income or ineligible because they're not low income, right? But if they remember to check that box, they receive a different application to fill out that talks about their disability. And that is what moves the process forward for them. And very often for those kiddos that have a primary insurance, they can receive Mass Health as a disability insurance, secondary insurance to that. And then oftentimes it results with no copay at their doctor's visits, or for the ABA services we were talking about that, with the frequency of 3 to 5 times a week, the copays could add up if you didn't have a secondary insurance. It can pick up the copay at the pharmacy. It's a very, very important resource to have to help fund all of these services that our kiddos need.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, Mass Health has saved us. Both the kids have it. And we do not pay a copay when we go to a doctor. We do not pay copays for medications, anything with Mass Health. It is income driven too. So that does factor in. But it's definitely good. I mean, we went and got them diagnosed, and then we went and did, we completed the process for SSI as well, or SSDI technically, to get that first, and then we got Mass Health. It was easier with Mass Health after the fact because they were actually legally disabled, technically. So, but that's also income driven. Like we used to get so much per each child before, but as the family makes more money, they drop that back. So, but once they turn 18, they get back on it. And it goes on their own income and not the family's income.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, Erik, if I was to go on your To a Spectrum Facebook page, do you offer advice to individuals, or what is it exactly you have on there? Is it something to promote and try to, because I see you post, certain posts about autism, but
Yeah.
do people reach out to you for assistance on advice and some things?
Yeah, that, and then on my blog post, they sometimes will message me there, and ask me that.
And that was your blog post, you said?
Yes. Yep. So
What is
it's
now? Let me ask you something, Erik, because I don't think I had that. What's your blog post?
It's on WordPress, so it's dualspectrumdad@wordpress.com. So it's connected to the Facebook page. So people will ask me things on that, and that is where I have my stories. Like early on, I used that as kind of it was more for a kind of release for me mentally, to write things down and all that. But like I go through all the different, like if you go through, there's a bunch of posts in there where from early on to now, and you can see the things that I've gone through, and I will give advice as to what we did and how we did it. So it makes it easier for someone, but I'm always open to anyone that wants to ask me any question they want, and I'll gladly help. The part that a lot of people again have issue with is some of those therapies like we were just talking about. A lot of that the school's responsible for. They're not just responsible for in school, they're responsible at home too. And a lot of people don't realize that. And it's not just academics, their mental well-being and their emotional support and all that is also included in that. And they have them until 22. So, a lot of people don't know that, when you get into IEPs for kids, people don't know you don't have to sign it and agree to it. They're proposing what they want. You don't have to agree. You can not. So there's so much that goes into it, but I'm always willing if anyone wants to ask, and I'll point them in the right direction.
That's good. Now, Melanie, do you come across as being an advocate, any obstacles that, you're always fighting the school systems for? Is there a lot that especially as being an advocate, because I know it's tough, and I talk to Brian and I hear stories and hardships about it. So, is there anything you can elaborate on that you run across a lot?
Well, I to further speak what Erik was just talking about with getting services at home, the educational law, it's another acronym, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, provides that students receive an education that prepares them for further education, employment, and independent living. And that is so critical when it comes to someone with autism, because they have their disability is such that it's very difficult to generalize what they learn in one setting across other settings. And so that is where the school has accountability to make sure what they're learning in school carries over to home or in the community. And it can be different for these kids with autism across all three settings, because the sensory input, the number of people who they're interacting with can be so different across all three settings. So we run into that a lot. And what I find most helpful is to first request evaluation of the school district. And as Erik mentioned, make sure that if you're in disagreement with what they're proposing through the IEP, that you accept what they propose to start, so long as it's not a reduction of what they had previously proposed. But note that it's insufficient to meet your child's needs, and wherever you can, be specific. And then in the meantime, get an expert opinion. Set up an evaluation for a neuropsychological evaluation. Have an assessment done at home to evaluate whether your child needs home ABA, and then use that as the evidence to move through dispute resolution with the school district. And the school district does have a responsibility to provide public funding for those evaluations. We were talking earlier, however, about the wait list for these hospitals and getting these evaluations done. And that's usually where we get hung up, because the schools are only required to pay what we call a state rate. And the big hospitals are typically the only ones that comply with that. So there is a long wait, but for families that aren't able to fund the evaluations on their own, that becomes sometimes the only option they have. So it's a long process, as Erik mentioned. I think you said for your son, Erik, it was about 1.5 years, and that's unfortunately, quite normal when you're in disagreement with the school district.
And then Melanie, do you want to touch on, or Erik, the stay put piece of the IEP?
Stay put. Oh, that is probably the most valuable educational right a parent has. So as I said earlier, when you respond to an IEP, you want to accept whatever you can to start, even though you know it's insufficient to meet your child's needs. But there are circumstances where a school may try to reduce services or change your child's placement. And if they do propose that reduction or change in placement, parents have this right to partially reject the IEP by stating they specifically reject that reduction, or they refuse that change in placement. And then they have to put in writing that they invoke their stay put rights to the most recently accepted IEP or placement. And that has come in handy for a number of reasons. One, it gives them time to go and seek that independent evaluation with an expert, right, to help substantiate whether or not that child needs to continue the service or not. It also allows them to have the school district on notice that they're in disagreement and use other methods to try and resolve the disagreement. Some parents like to use mediation as a process or hire an attorney and consider filing for hearing. So it's a valuable educational right.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, like, for us, most recently, we did not agree with my son's IEP. So what we did was there were some things that we did agree to. So we checked off that we agree to this not in total, in partial, and then we wrote in what we wanted. And at the first time we had to do it, it was we wanted a second opinion and an evaluation done, but they're paying for it. And we put that stipulated in that. So then they hired an agency and they came out and did a secondary evaluation. And I didn't go through the insurance. We didn't pay for it. The school did. And finally, getting to the point now where so it was a step process. The first step was, we wouldn't sign the IEP at all. We're like, no. And then not signing that just also means that they're staying with the current one that they have, which is kind of a dual-edged sword sometimes, because if your child needs something more than they're getting, they're not getting it because you didn't sign it. So you have to be careful there. And again, that's about knowing what you need and, all of that. And then, if you don't understand it, I would highly recommend having an advocate that does. My wife and I handled this ourselves, but we had done it 8 years ago for my daughter. We were at the point where we were fighting with them for 1.5 years and thought, well, maybe it's time again because, it was getting there. And then we kind of pushed it over the edge. We did a mediation meeting and, we had a representative from DESE on there and she kind of helped us and they forced it. So, we just have a lot of experience, so it worked out, but I would highly suggest if someone doesn't, hire someone that does. Just if it helps, and I'm pretty sure they still do it, but when we worked with my daughter years ago, and we did hire an advocate that time, because again, it was way early on, DDS paid for it. We applied for DDS and they paid for it. Our advocate, she was very, very nice. And she said, even if it goes over what they're going to give me, I'll just take what they give me. Cause she looked into the case and saw, my daughter really, really needed it. But she was great. So there's help out there. You just have to, no one's going to give it to you though. You got to get it. Is what I would say.
Yeah, if I could just give a couple other resources, DBS is a great resource. They will typically, when funds are available, provide annual stipends to families that can be used towards advocacy or other services, respite, things that are not covered by insurance. But the Federation for Children with Special Needs and Massachusetts Advocates for Children are two other really great organizations that can either answer quick questions over the phone or give you referrals to advocates that, if income eligible, may provide you pro bono services or services on a sliding scale. And so I often receive referrals from them, and it works well for me because they kind of screen them out, because it's a really difficult job in my position. If I could, I wouldn't charge anyone, right? But I need to be able to make a living. So it's helpful when, the Federation or Mass Advocates gives me a call and says, here's this situation. We've already screened them. They're low income. They need help. And I can make sure that I allocate my resources most effectively for me to continue to do what I do as well.